Welcome to the Write Good Books podcast, the audio companion to WriteGoodBooks.com, with your host Jason Bougger.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to the Write Good Books podcast. I'm Jason. I'm joined finally for the first time in a couple of weeks with our co-host Scott Michael Childers. What's up, Scott?
You know, I'm just like happy to be here, man.
Yeah, dude.
Excuse me.
We've had just schedule problems and whatnot, but we're both here for a change. And shall we talk?
Yes, let's talk.
We
Let's
shall
talk
talk.
to our audience.
Yes, we're going to talk about audience, and I want to start with a couple of quick stories. Skip ahead maybe a minute and a half if you don't want to hear my quick stories.
Story time with Jason. It's all about good times.
There we go. I was at a convention one time, and it was a sci-fi convention, and one of the panelists there, I recognize his name, and then I go to my website and like, oh yeah, I was in an anthology with this guy, so I'll go talk to him after the, and I go up to him. I'm not going to throw out any names because I don't like picking on people or starting internet fights and things
No
like
internet
that.
feuds for you.
Yeah, we don't like the internet's feuds here because I would most certainly lose because I'm a very weak-minded person. Maybe not.
Anyway.
I go up to the guy and I'm like, hey, I introduce myself. I'm like, we were publishing this anthology together. I liked your story. I don't know if you read mine. I don't know if I said anything like that, but I just whatever. It was like I wasn't even talking to him. He's handing me his flyer and he's trying to sell me his book, just like that. And then he walks away. It's like, I'm not there. I was there as a writer. I wasn't there. I was there for his panel on writing. I was a writer. I wasn't there to buy his books. His steampunk panels, that's who he should have tried to sell his book to, not the other writers. And then on a similar note, I was at a book signing a year or so ago, and there was a publisher there that I had a short story in one of their magazines. So I went up to them, and and the owner of the company was there, and I introduced myself as, hey, I was in your episode of whatever magazine. And again, it was the same thing. He was like, oh, yeah. Well, what do you like to read? And I'm like, well, sci-fi, fantasy, horror. Oh, you might like this book. And he's instantly trying to sell books to me. He totally glossed over the fact that I was one of his published writers, and he was trying to sell me books. And it's like, I'm not your target audience, dude. Your target audience is out there, and you're trying to sell me books. So it got me thinking about target audience, and but I wanted to just talk about target audience, and should you write for a target audience? If so, why? Should you try to sell to a certain target audience, and if so, how? After that long rant, do you have anything you'd like to jump in with?
Well, actually, I think those stories really do point out the need to know where your message is going, whether it's post-writing or as you're writing or post-writing, knowing who needs to hear those words or who needs to read those words helps a whole lot.
Yes, it does.
I mean, because like you said, those sales pitches weren't just falling on deaf ears. They were like, there's a pushback now.
Yes.
Just like that one author that you were talking about, you still tell that story. Have you bought any of that guy's books?
No, of course not.
And that publisher, have you tried to sell a story with that publisher?
Of course not.
See?
Mm-hmm.
So that's where this top target audience thing, if you ignore that, or actively work against that, your writing will not be accepted quite as easily. I don't have any stories as neatly illustrative as those.
You have an opposite story though. You wrote a book for a specific target audience. You went out and found that audience, and you sold some books.
Yeah, and my first book, it's a history of a small town, and so who do I try to sell the book to? The people living or from that small town. I'm not trying to sell it, over on the coasts. This is a Midwestern railroad town. I'm not trying to sell it in New York City. I'm not trying to sell it in Canada. I'm not trying to get a translation deal for Germany or anything like that.
Right.
I had an audience. I knew this was going to be a small niche audience, and so that's all the print run we did, and it worked fine. I mean, the sales were all right for first-time author, my first book, basically. And so if I didn't focus on that, If I tried to make it, the mainstream appeal, I don't think it would have worked as well.
Right.
And writing it would have been, man, it would have been a chore, because then I would have been trying to write to, Joe Blow in Miami, Florida, who has no idea what the plains of Nebraska looks like.
Sure.
Right?
And then this way, since you knew your audience was people from that town, you could throw in details about that town that would touch a sentimental nerve on them. Or
yeah, I could throw in some family histories of the people who, the families that were still there, which were interesting to that group, and would have been completely boring for the others, because then I would have had to go into the whole backstory of why this family name is important, because his family is still there or still owns half the town or whatever.
Sure.
I can use some shorthand. So yeah, knowing that target audience as you're writing can really help. And even not even just in this historical, I have this specific geographic place, but if you know the types of reader you want to attract, that can really inform your writing style.
Very good point. See, so my problem is I did the exact opposite when I wrote my first book. I said, well, I listen to a lot of John Green books. I think I could write like that. And I tell, and I write like that. I have no idea who I'm actually writing for. It's got Christian themes, but it's not a Christian book. It's got young adult themes, but it is a young adult book, but I don't know anything about young adults. How do you market to young adults? Tide Pods? See, that statement right there shows that I know nothing about young adults. I just take the worst of the worst and stereotype it.
Oh my gosh, shake my head.
Into one thing. So you need to know, if you're going to target an audience, you need to know that audience. My kids are way too young to be a young adult, and I was a young adult far too long ago to have any clue. So it's interesting stuff, I guess.
Yeah, well, like you're talking about, what is it what kind of sentence structure do you use? How much detail do you use? What are the themes that you use? These are important. And your target audience, along with the genre style, right? And we talked about that before, is the genre sometimes dictates that.
Oh, yes.
But your target audience within that genre can really change the way you approach a story. For example, I'm reading Aurora by Kim Stanley Robinson.
Okay.
Right? It is hard sci-fi. There's a lot of numbers and number crunching and science and that type of thing. For many people, that is not a book they will read. They'll go to it and they'll read like a science textbook.
Sure.
Right? Those people aren't Kim Stanley Robinson's target audience. Right? Especially for this book. So knowing that target audience, that I'm going to attract that group of people, so I am free to write this way.
Yeah.
I don't have to try to dumb down this or try to make it extra relatable to a group that doesn't know much about some of the laws of physics.
Right. So if you're a first-time writer, do you think you should get that specific for your audience?
I think one of the things first-time writers need to do is find their own voice, and then that will help them figure out their target audience.
Oh, that's a real good point. Write what you like, write what you're good at.
And then through the next couple of passes, that's when you're really, your first draft, you're writing your story. And then as you refine it, then you start seeing, okay, this is where this is leading me. My natural writing style is leading me to this type of thing.
Yeah.
Do I naturally gloss over details? Do I throw in a lot of details? Am I wordy? Am I brief? All of those type of things can help you define the types of audience you may naturally be attracted to.
Yeah, and then maybe in revisions, you do try to, I don't want to say mimic some of the more famous writers, but kind of tweak towards that style.
You massage it into something else. And I'm not saying this in the only way. I mean, someone could go in and say, I am going to write for this audience because that's what I'm getting paid to write to.
Right.
Or I really want to try to see if I can reach that audience. And it's not my natural voice. It's not my natural style. There's nothing wrong with that. But I do think knowing who you're trying to write to can help you come up with a story that will actually connect. Or a way of saying that, or putting that story into words that will help connect, that might not otherwise happen.
Yeah.
Whoa, that was deep.
You stunned me.
So, I mean, and there are some folks that say, well, a target audience shouldn't really exist. You should just write, and then whoever picks up the story picks it up. But how do you feel about
That was how I used to write.
Oh, okay.
And so my short stories, I cover everything, except I can't really do hard sci-fi, and I can't really do epic fantasy well, so I don't really write that. But I did learn something recently. I would write with no target audience in mind, and I would just write and see what comes out. It was usually, horror-ish or whatever. But then I started working on an epic fantasy trilogy, and I had to stop and say, dude, you ain't no Brandon Sanderson.
Yeah.
I couldn't get that style right, and I knew it still felt too much like me, like my style, and my style would not sell for an epic fantasy fan base.
Oh, okay.
So I put that project aside, and I was like, well, so what am I good at? Who is my audience? I can write horror, I can write light fantasy. So to me, that translates to kind of dark fantasy that I'm writing on, and my voice stays. It's not the young adult voice I'd use in Holy Fudge's Golds, but it's the voice I'd use in most of my short stories. So I guess I was actually writing with the target audience in mind for a change.
Well, and I've heard it said, you write the stories that you want to read. Mm-hmm. And I think that creates a more natural fit for a target audience because you aren't mathematically saying there's going to be at least another person out there whose likes are going to be similar enough to yours that they will want to read that book. I'm just saying there's a lot of people on this planet.
Yeah.
A lot of them do read.
Yeah.
And so, that's a more natural way of letting it happen. Mm-hmm. And we're kind of glossing over some people maybe work for hire and they have to fit a certain target audience.
That's their strength.
Maybe. Or it's just what they have to do due to contract.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So you guys, we're thinking of you. Plow through as best you can to fulfill your contract.
Our target audience of this podcast is the writer who's, is kind of new at the craft and getting to fill things and I hope we help them.
So you've changed your mind on target audience.
Yeah. In fact, because of thinking of target audience, I don't think I'll probably write another young adult book again, at least not in that style. Maybe young adult fantasy, but not like modern day American young adult, even if it's got a paranormal bent. I'm too far removed from that audience at this point in my life. Low 40s. My kids are too young to know what's going on. I don't know what teens talk about. I'm old enough now that I get together with friends my age. We talk about what parts of our bodies hurt and hope we don't poop our pants. What do teens talk about?
I'm sure somewhere some teen is talking about not pooping their pants.
Maybe. But and then as far as young adult, trying to find that audience, how do you learn? You listen to people talk. So what do? You hang out in malls, you hang out in and you listen to people, and I don't know.
Well, again, I mean, your natural voice and your natural inclination and how you write,
right,
and and the way you feel comfortable setting the grammar and setting the dialogue and how much detail. I don't know if person should be, if they have the freedom to choose, I don't think a person should be so geared to force themselves into writing for a target audience that they don't think they can hit. I think you write, you see what target audience naturally fits your style at this time, and things could change, and markets could change too, and then you work with that, So what do you think?
Well, I think you make some excellent points.
All right.
But one thing that I do want to bring up real quick before we close things out, when you make it, and all of a sudden, hey, I'm writing full time, I've got a half a dozen books published, and I'm actually getting royalty checks on a regular basis, enough to buy groceries. Are you limited? Once you're limited to that target audience, do you think you're stuck? Are you stuck with that genre? Are you stuck writing to that audience? Is that audience going to be betrayed if you don't write to them? And I'm going to use another Paramore reference. Their last two albums, especially this last one, is not to their target audience at all. It's to a different target audience. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's a different style of music. So then their old audience, like me, say, "Oh, this is crap," and you won't even look at any value in it. And I've seen that from Star Wars fans and things like that too. Do you betray your original target audience if you switch things up?
Well, and that's a good question, and I think there's a couple things to unpack in that. One is, after you've quote-unquote made it, right, your target audience is no longer a genre. You are the selling point. That's what I'm assuming is. By you say you made it, you are now a name.
Then you have more freedom to experiment.
Because they are coming, now it's not just genre, it's this author.
Yeah.
Right? So that gives you a little bit more freedom, but like you said, you go too far out of that, you are no longer the author that drew them in. And we've seen that with musical groups besides Paramore, and I will agree their latest album is a vast departure from their first works. But like even the Rolling Stones had that argument.
Yeah.
And the Beatles when they switched up things, right? And some do it on purpose. They say, I'm in a rut and I'm breaking things out.
Oh, yeah.
But even like Stephen King, whose name we brought up many times on this, his style has changed and evolved, and a lot of his current works are very different than...
He's really broadened out from his first 5
right.
books, yeah.
And so that's another thing. You could try to box yourself in and only push the edges a little bit, or you could say, I'm trying something new. I feel like I could attempt a different style. Or
some might try pen names. I'm not
Rowling.
a big fan of pen names in today's age,
but look at J.K. Rowling, right? Harry Potter, and then I want to try something new, so come up with a pen name and sell a book that way. And others do that too. Yeah. But in that case, you're selling to that genre audience or that target audience as opposed to your fandom. And I don't know if that's the same thing as a target audience or not.
You're right. We'll leave that to the fans to decide.
Okay.
All 5 of you.
Hi, Mom.
Hey, kids. Okay. Scott's making faces, so I'm going to wrap things up.
It's been a while since we've recorded together, apparently.
We forgot how to wrap things up.
So if you really liked our ramblings today, please go to www.patreon.com/writegoodbooks.
That's the one.
And help us pay for something that will keep us on track during recording.
There you go. And also on the web at writegoodbooks.com/podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
See ya.